Hello and welcome back to the One Shot Show where GMs go to level up. How dangerous is a dragon?
I suppose how dangerous your party is at this point.
Okay, that's a really good counter question. To further that, how dangerous is a runaway goat?
Ooh, it's so interesting. I suppose it depends. Yeah, it depends on so many things.
Well, I'd say first and foremost it depends on how strong your party is. And more importantly, it depends on who is in danger. We are talking about a concept called scale of threat. This is about mapping or indeed understanding creatures relative to the threat they pose. It's not just about villains or sort of big bads or particular, centerpiece type antagonistic forces, be they of sound mind or otherwise bestial. This is about the different scale of threat of a creature, so that when you are planning out the beats in your campaign, the sessions that might be interesting, the places you might go, it is important to think about the scale of the threat that is currently being posed.
Yeah.
I'll start us off nice and little at the low end with our runaway goat. Or indeed, let's pick a creature that's maybe a bit more conventional from the monster manual, right? Let's say you roll into a town. And the town, we're talking, there's maybe 50 people total in this broader township, most of which are going to be farmers that do not live in the town center. They live in farmsteads around the outskirts of it. And they say, yeah, we do have a problem ailing our town right now. What kind of creature do you think might be appropriate here?
I mean, you've got classic like wolves in the wood, or maybe there's like an owlbear who is coming in, who is sort of like taking cows away. These like we're early days.
Yeah,
those are the sorts of things that are.
But if they said, yeah, there's a dragon nearby, you'd go, bullshit. Bullshit. That feels like bullshit. As a player, that immediately feels ridiculous, right? It's too much. The scale is too big. Now, I know that as a GM, it's like, oh, it's going to be so cool we get to fight a dragon, right? And there might even be a stat block here that says, oh, yep, low-level dragon. Hey, don't even worry about it, low-level dragon threat. But it just feels wrong. Doesn't pass the sniff test. You're right. What kind of problem is going to be facing a small town? It's going to be, oh, there's livestock disappearing. Something's afoot. We think it might be wolves. And in the unwinding of that, it might turn out, okay, it's not wolves, it's a small camp of goblins who have been trying to utilize the cattle for some other bizarre purpose. Some strange dark ritual. So you can have the threat grow as the conspiracy behind the immediate hook unwinds, but you cannot start from, yes, there is a goblin necromancer in the woods who is stealing our livestock for dark rituals. Could you go and deal with that? You have to start at cattle are disappearing, and then the players are going, okay, cattle disappearances. Here's a few things that might cause that aren't so dangerous that the town has to be, like, afraid for the lives of its citizens, right? Maybe if things get out of hand, they would. But again, scale of threat, right? This is the way we're thinking about it. We're thinking, what's scary about this to the villagers? Well, it's the fact that their livestock are disappearing. The cattle are going missing, and that is the livelihoods of a lot of the people in this town. It represents an existential threat to this town that does not necessarily put at risk the lives of the villagers insofar as, oh, the orc camp over the way is going to raid us unless someone stops them. Yeah. Let's be realistic about it. Let's be a little bit more sensible about the scale of threat being posed.
Well, yes, what I like about your example when I was considering this topic, I was going like the consequence of whatever the dangerous course of action can be. It can be so many different things. It can be like specific to a region. It may not be the end of, it's not the end of the world stakes. We're sort of not in the MCU where everything has to be ending the world. But it's like, the disappearance of cattle for this small town constitutes a large enough, realistic enough threat to be a compelling adventure. And those, like, the consequences could be personal to your adventurers, to your party. They could be, like, political to the region that you're in. Yeah, when you proposed this as a topic, I was going, like, yeah, there are so many different types of threats that you can put in the way of your party that aren't always just big monster gets in way.
Well, the other thing as well that you kind of alluded to at the start unintentionally is this also depends on where your party's at. What level are they? How powerful are they? What is their reputation in the land? Things like that. Because, to be honest, late in the game, level 15 plus, they're not going to stop in at the small town to see what's up with them cattle disappearances, even though they probably could solve that problem very, very quickly.
At this point? Ooh,
for your players at the table, that's actually not going to be a satisfying adventure anymore, unfortunately. You can do it in some ways to make it a little bit interesting, have it unwind in the course of like 20 minutes in a dice roll to remind them how powerful they've become. That can be nice. Not enough to be a whole session or multiple like it was at the start of the campaign. So you talked about the sort of whether it's local, whether it's regional, whether it's global. That's a way of thinking as the scope at which your party operates also increases. The thing that I think actually really is helped by this framework is the when should my players run away kind of thing. How do I make it clear to my players that they should run away? When they are third level and they roll up to a big city and the guard are like, oh, thank goodness, we need every able hand, there's a dragon coming. That's when the party is probably going to be like, you know what, peace, that's your problem to deal with. Sorry, we couldn't be more helpful. We are going to die here if we stick around, right? If they understand that the threat that they're going to face will be appropriate for the level that they're at, it makes it a lot easier to tell when something is far more threatening because it's probably operating on a much bigger scale than they are. The other thing this delivers you is really, really easy, satisfying beats because when they do reach the point where they can kill a dragon, even if it's a little bit sketchy the first time around, it's going to feel very satisfying because they remember that time that they had to skip town and watch a city get razed from, their vantage up on the hill because, well, they would have just been there, getting burned themselves if they stuck around.
Yeah, I love that. It's such a challenge. I find it such a challenging thing to get players often to back off a threat. Especially like if they're newer players in particular.
Yeah.
And it's like I suppose like that question of like what is threatening, how powerful are you? I suppose that's something that you need to know. Your players kind of maybe need to know as well. Otherwise you end up in dangerous TPK situations.
Yeah. And there's something almost gamified about this. Depending on the structure of your campaign, you can even lean into this. When you play certain games and you wander a little bit off the beaten path, and if it shows enemy levels, or sometimes they just have like a skull symbol next to them to say, hey, this is way too dangerous
and
for
I feel as a GM, I can communicate the skull flavorfully for text to a certain extent. But sometimes it requires like half the party's hit points disappearing very quickly for them to figure out how they're going to run away.
And there's a couple of ways that you can kind of introduce this from a world-building standpoint, introduce this concept of mapping enemies to scale. Look, one of the really easy things is when you're looking at it in that kind of open world way, hey, we've got this big, vast place that we're going to travel all around, this massive setting, and over here is the extremely dangerous ice wastes with all the really, really high-level creatures. You're going to have ways that you can signpost that, like they draw close and suddenly the scale of threat to them takes a significant leap and they end up having to run and they go, okay, we're not ready to face that yet. The other way, if you've got something that's a little bit more self-contained that wants to sort of stick in the same region for a long period of time, for example, if you might be doing a West Marches style campaign, what it often is the external force grows in scope. So at the start, because you are often operating in a region, you start with the local threats, where it might be something that affects like the village in this hex and, the few hexes nearby. And then you sort of slowly can scale that up to regional. And once you hit the point of regional threats, you can start having things that are external, right? If you've effectively cleared out an area and made it safe and peaceful, and then an orcish warband rolls through from the east, now that region is no longer safe anymore, and the scale is appropriate to the scale of threat is appropriate to the scale of region that you're operating on. And then as you get even bigger, when you start getting to world-ending threats, the key relic for the villain's evil plan happens to be contained within the region that you've been operating in all of this time. So you're still able to face this global threat or this realm-wide threat still within the context of the discrete place in the world you've chosen to set your entire campaign.
What experiences have you had of introducing basically your world-ending threat? Like how early, like in a narrative process? Like what have you toyed with there?
Actually, I'll use a very recent example because I think this was particularly interesting. My most recent campaign ended with a final battle against a hag coven. Now, this is really interesting because they met the first hag of this coven way before they were of a level to like attack and fight and kill a hag, right?
Cool.
Like this is a creature that operated on a scale in excess of them. Now, because it's an intelligent creature, they had dealings with them instead, right? Like there was another layer of interaction. It didn't have to be immediately inherently hostile.
All my favorite big bads have ended up started out as like an NPC who they were in a social encounter with for at least a while.
And it didn't have to turn hostile in the long run either necessarily. Then they reached a point where they probably could go kill a hag, possibly even a hag coven. But also at this point, the scale necessary for the final piece of this campaign was greater than a hag coven. A hag coven is a very unusual kind of enemy to have be like your biggest bad in a campaign.
That's why I'm so tickled by it.
So this hag coven is also trying to advance in the world and influence a wider scale, they were trying to shift from regional to global. They had acquired dangerous artifacts that would help them do this. Happened to be that it was the same one that the party was seeking in aiding another NPC. So then this final encounter comes to, and what we have is an enemy of necessary threat. Now, hags are really great for this because they're intelligent, right? A hag with 100 extremely powerful magical artifacts makes for just as exciting an encounter as a lich with the same repertoire of magic that they can just cast themselves without needing items to do it.
That's cool.
What about you? I mean, this is...
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's so interesting. I would go when we one day talk about like some of the biggest like missteps or failures in campaign. I think this thing of when and how to properly enjoy like the dance of introducing those threats. It's a little bit like if I think about like a great piece of like score or like classical music with a theme to it, like the variations on that theme and being able to like modulate it to the point of satisfaction for your players. Yeah, it feels so very, very cool. Like in some cases, like my West Marches, there was like a huge environmental threat that they knew infected all of the factions of that campaign, and it sat there. It was the first thing to come out in session 0, and it was the last thing that we spoke about at the campaign finale, and it hangs there the whole time. But sometimes, I don't know, like in like an adventure sort of sandbox of the week scenario, yeah, it's dependent on the story that I want to tell, but always I'm thinking about the music of it. I'm thinking about where are we going to have our light and shade, like our ups and downs, like the balance of all of those threats and moments. I love a hag coven though.
I love a hag coven. They're classic for a reason. I wouldn't normally peel back the curtain like this, but I don't believe we have our time. How much time do we have left?
Where did we go?
Did I not put the timer up? I'm so sorry. I thought I did. That's really bad.
It's okay. I was thinking as well. I was like, I feel now we've hit.
You're at
12
minutes.
Hey, look at that. Look at that.
Can you see the timer on the screen now?
Okay. That means we've got like a minute hot to trot to wrap this up. Because the last thing I wanted to talk about is the fact that this can go wrong and what happens when it goes wrong. The really obvious one is you introduce a threat that is too big too early. And that can even just be that you hint at the big global threat way too early in a campaign. I know it can feel really nice to have like a North Star for where the story is eventually going. I'm going to tell you two things. First of all, that's going to hamstring you in terms of the story you actually become able to tell as things develop in your campaign, because unexpected things will happen. And it often reaches the point where you're trying to beat that narrative into shape to still deal with that big world-ending threat that you introduced too early.
Season 3.
Yep. There's also the world where it's too easy to just damn well give up. It's like, well, that's ridiculous, and how am I supposed to map that to what I do next session? And then you end up with players that are trying to chew too much too quick because they're like, well, we've got to save the world, so there's no point stopping in at this town that has a level appropriate threat for our characters, right? And the whole thing comes apart at the seams. The opposite of this is, of course, too low a threat, right? It's more obvious when you're at a really high level and something is really, really trivial. You can, as I said, you can sometimes be trying to accomplish something else in the narrative by doing that. But if you do that, make sure you wrap it up quickly. Don't have it take up a whole lot of time. It's in those mid-levels that it's really, really difficult. If they're sort of in that level 8 to 11 band, I'm talking specifically in 5e, but most other sort of 1 to 20 systems have a similar kind of point around there where actually a goblin camp, even if it has 100 goblins, stops being scary. Even though that feels like that should be about appropriate, given that to start with, they could maybe deal with a small goblin raiding party, and then 3 levels on, they can deal with a goblin, war band. And now 3 levels on should be dealing with the whole camp. No, they just walk in with like 5 fireballs and the whole thing is over in a moment. And it's not actually an appropriate scale of threat. You need to add a little bit more in there to juice it up a little bit.
Yeah, which is where like mastery of whatever system that you're playing will allow you on your side of the table as the GM to make sure that you are modulating whatever threat is coming forward toward the players. Because it's like when you read the names of the creatures initially on the page, maybe that's initially it may not be that obvious.
Yeah. Look, this is one of these ones that I could just wax on about for absolutely ages. But since we now have the timer, that's all the time we have. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thanks to our producer, Shana, who you have now met. And we will see you in the next one. If you enjoyed that episode of the One Shot Show, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/oneshot show. You'll see all of the offerings available. You can commission custom episodes. You can get video versions of our regular weekly episodes. You can get monthly bonus episodes where we deep dive into particular topics. You can submit questions for our regular Q&A format, and we have a new offering that we're going to be launching this month, where at the end of each month we will do a live Q&A session in our Discord server talking about the episodes from the most recent month. Also, for the next 3 months, anyone who backs us on Patreon will get 5 complimentary invites to our Discord server as we grow that community further. Please check it out and please support the show.